Are you sure that all the love and care you shower on your plants this winter isn't actually a slow, methodical murder? I know that sounds harsh, but the grim truth is that most of us, despite wanting the best for our green pets, commit the exact same fatal mistakes, and the biggest one involves water. We think watering is an act of care, but in winter it often becomes a death sentence. In this video, we aren't just going to ask if you should water your plants in the cold. We are going to expose the raw truth about this whole process. You'll find out why your usual care routine can be deadly, when watering is actually a salvation, and when it's the final nail in the coffin of your beloved houseplant. Stick around until the end, and I promise, you will look at that watering can in your hand with completely different eyes. And maybe, just maybe, that will save your entire plant collection this winter. Have you ever found a literal swamp at the bottom of a pot, even though you thought you were watering moderately? Write yes in the comments if that sounds familiar. To truly understand how to water correctly in winter, we need to take a little journey into the very heart of the plant and understand what happens when it's snowing outside and the daylight hours are shorter than a workday. Imagine a bear in its den. It's not eating, it's not drinking, and its heart rate has dropped significantly. It's hibernating. In the exact same way as the cold sets in and daylight decreases, most plants enter a state of rest, or, to use the scientific term, a period of dormancy. This isn't a disease, it's an evolutionary survival mechanism. All the plant's internal processes slow down to the absolute minimum. Photosynthesis essentially grinds to a halt because light levels are dramatically low, meaning energy production stops. Growth ceases entirely. The plant isn't building new leaves or shoots. It's simply waiting for spring. Now for the million-dollar question. If the plant isn't growing, isn't photosynthesizing, and is generally sleeping, does it need the same amount of water it needed during the summer's massive growth spurt? The answer is obviously no. Water is essential for growth and photosynthesis. No growth means the demand for water drops exponentially, and this is where the fundamental misunderstanding lies, the one that leads to disaster. We continue to care for our plants as if it were the middle of July, failing to recognize that their internal clock is signaling the dead of winter. Grasping this simple truth, that your green pet is currently a bear in a den, is the first and most crucial step toward proper winter plant care. Alright, we've established that plants enter dormancy during the winter months. Now let's dive into the nuts and bolts of the process, the physiology, so you're not just following instructions, but truly understanding the underlying principles. Metabolic slowdown is the key concept here. In summer, when sunlight is abundant, the plant is actively engaged in photosynthesis. This is a complex process, but simply put, it's an energy factory, manufacturing sugars, its power source, from light, water, and carbon dioxide. This energy is spent on growing new leaves, stems, roots, and on flowering. Water, in this process, acts both as raw material and as a transportation system, delivering nutrients from the soil throughout the plant. Picture a bustling metropolis with thousands of cars zipping back and forth. In winter, however, when the daylight hours are short and light intensity is minimal, this factory almost completely shuts down. There simply isn't enough sunlight for effective photosynthesis. The plant switches to a strict energy-saving mode. New cells are barely formed, and sap flow slows down dramatically. That thriving internal metropolis turns into a sleepy town observing a siesta. If we continue to saturate it with water at this point, a collapse occurs. Water enters the roots, but it's not being used because the factory is idle and the transportation system is unnecessary. The root system simply cannot absorb and process all that moisture. The water stagnates in the soil, effectively drowning out the oxygen, which is absolutely vital for the roots to breathe. Yes, roots breathe too. Without oxygen, the root cells begin to die and rot. This is similar to force-feeding someone who is sound asleep. Their body isn't ready to digest food. Likewise, a dormant plant is not ready to assimilate water. Visualize this. Healthy roots are white, firm, and vibrant. Roots in waterlogged soil are brown, soft, mushy, and often have a foul odour. That is the beginning of the end. Understanding this mechanism at the cellular level helps us grasp the seriousness of the situation and stop viewing watering as an unqualified benefit. Understanding the physiology of dormancy leads directly to the most important golden rule of care that every gardener must internalise. It is always better to underwater than to overwater. This phrase is often repeated like a mantra, but let's explore the science behind it so it becomes more than just a slogan. The consequences of underwatering versus overwatering differ drastically in their destructive power. What happens when a plant doesn't get enough water? It starts using its internal reserves. The leaves might lose their turgor, becoming limp and wilted. The plant is essentially signalling to you, "Hey, I'm thirsty." In most cases, if the dry spell wasn't of extreme duration, one thorough watering will fully restore the plant. The leaves fill back out, and life continues. It's a stressor, yes, but rarely a fatal one. Plants are evolutionarily adapted to cope with short periods of drought. Now let's consider the scenario of overwatering. As we established, excess water in the pot displaces oxygen. The roots begin to suffocate and rot. This process is called root rot, and it is insidious. Unlike the clear wilting seen during drought, the initial symptoms of overwatering often look exactly the same. Leaves yellow and drop. A novice grower sees this and thinks, "It must need water," and waters again, only exacerbating the situation. But the critical problem is that the rotting roots can no longer absorb water, even if it's available. The plant is dying of thirst while literally sitting in a swamp. It's a cruel paradox. Saving a plant with extensive root rot is an extremely difficult, often impossible task. It requires emergency repotting, cutting away all the rotted material and treating it with fungicides. The chances of success are slim. Imagine a scale. On one side, you have the temporary discomfort of thirst, which is easily remedied. On the other, you have the irreversible process of decay, leading inevitably to death. Clearly, the risk of overwatering is far more frightening. Therefore, if you have even the slightest doubt about whether to water, always choose the latter option. Don't water. Give your plant another day, 2 or 3. A slight drought will cause disproportionately less harm than a single instance of excess watering. Remember this, a dry plant cries out for help, but an overwatered one dies silently and cruelly. Now that we've covered the theoretical groundwork, let's dive into the practical side and discuss the number one and arguably most common mistake of winter plant care, watering on a rigid schedule. I'm sure many of you are nodding right now. You decide you'll water your plants. Say, every Saturday morning. It's convenient, it organises your routine, and it feels like systematic, responsible care. But for your plants, this approach is a recipe for disaster. Why? Because a plant's water needs are not constant. They fluctuate daily based on numerous factors. Imagine 2 winter weeks. The first week is gloomy, grey, and the sun barely peeks through. The second week, however, is surprisingly bright, with rays actively streaming through the window. Obviously, during the second week, even in winter, photosynthesis is more active. This means transpiration, the evaporation of moisture, and the resulting need for water are significantly higher. Now let's go back to your rigid Saturday watering schedule. During that first gloomy week, the soil might still be soaking wet by Saturday, making your watering completely superfluous, even damaging. But during the second sunny week, the plant might be thirsty by Wednesday, forcing it to suffer for 3 more days until your scheduled watering. Watering by schedule completely ignores the biological reality of a living organism. It's like feeding a child strictly 3 meals a day, exactly 200 grams each, regardless of whether they are ravenous or just finished a huge snack. Another critical factor is the temperature in your home. Today, the heating might be blasting, making the room hot and dry. Tomorrow, you might air out the apartment, dropping the temperature near the windowsill. In the first scenario, the soil dries out faster. In the second, much slower. Even a slight draft can significantly accelerate evaporation. Your goal isn't to follow a rigid calendar blindly, but to learn how to read your plant's signs and understand the specific environment it lives in. The correct approach isn't a watering schedule, it's a checking schedule. You can still check on your plants every Saturday, but you only water the ones that genuinely need it at that specific moment. Moving away from a strict timetable to a flexible, thoughtful approach is the crucial first step toward becoming a true, conscientious plant parent, not just a plant owner. On screen, you can see an example calendar. One is crossed out, labelled watering schedule, and the other has check marks, labelled checking schedule. This simple shift in perspective changes everything. Alright, so we've ditched the strict watering schedule. But how do you actually know when your plant is thirsty? Today I'm going to share 3 simple, yet foolproof methods for checking soil moisture that anyone can use. Forget guesswork, we're going to rely on facts. The first method, which is the most common and intuitive, is the Shea finger test. It's straightforward. Just push your index finger about 2 to 3 centimeters deep into the soil, or roughly to your first knuckle. If the soil at that depth feels damp and sticks to your finger, it's too early to water. Your plant still has enough moisture. But if your finger comes out dry and clean and the soil feels crumbly to the touch, it's time for a drink. This method works well for most plants in small and medium pots. However, it has one major drawback. It doesn't assess moisture deep down where the primary roots are. Sometimes the top layer is dry, but the bottom is still completely saturated, a virtual bog. That's why, for larger plants and deep planters, it's better to use the second method, the wooden skewer test. Grab any unfinished wooden stick, a chopstick, a long wooden skewer, or even a simple pencil will work. Carefully insert it into the soil all the way to the bottom of the pot, making sure to avoid major root damage. Leave it there for a few minutes, then pull it out. Inspect the stick closely. If it's damp, has dark spots, or has bits of soil clinging to it, there's still plenty of moisture deep down. If the stick comes out nearly dry and clean, you can water confidently. This is the most accurate indicator of soil conditions throughout the entire depth. Finally, we have the third method, which truly comes with experience, the weight test, or the lift test. This is perfect for plants in small to medium plastic pots. Simply lift the pot right after you finish watering and remember how heavy it feels. Lift it periodically over the next few days. You'll be amazed at how much lighter the pot becomes as the soil dries out. With practice, you'll be able to tell precisely when a plant needs water just by its weight. This method is quick, requires no tools, and doesn't disturb the soil structure. By combining these 3 methods, you can create a complete and objective picture of the soil condition in every single pot. You'll make watering decisions based not on guesswork or intuition, but on verifiable data. That is the true professional approach to plant care. The next crucial aspect, one that's often completely overlooked, but which profoundly affects root health in winter, is the temperature of your watering water. You might think, what's the difference? Water is just water. But the actual impact is dramatic. Picture this. Your plant is sitting comfortably in a warm room. The soil temperature in the pot is, let's say, 20 degrees Celsius. Then you take ice cold water straight from the tap, maybe only 5 to 7 degrees Celsius, and drench it. For the root system, this is a genuine shock, similar to having a bucket of freezing water dumped on you in the middle of summer. Physiologically, what happens? This sudden temperature drop severely stresses the delicate root hairs, the finest extensions responsible for absorbing water and nutrients. They can suffer what is essentially a thermal shock, causing them to seize up or spasm, temporarily or sometimes permanently, losing their absorption capacity. As a result, the plant you just watered cannot absorb it. The water sits stagnant in the pot, increasing the risk of rot, while the plant itself remains stressed and dehydrated. If you consistently use cold water, the entire root system weakens, making it far more vulnerable to various diseases, especially root rot. Your plant might slow its growth, begin dropping leaves, and you'll be struggling to figure out the cause, completely unaware that you're regularly subjecting it to an ice bath. So, what is the ideal temperature? The rule is very simple. Your watering water should be at room temperature or just a couple of degrees warmer. It should feel comfortable or even slightly warm on your hand. The easiest way to achieve this is to fill your watering can or bottle and leave it to sit in the same room as your plants for several hours, or ideally for a full day. During this time, the water not only warms up to the correct temperature, but a portion of the chlorine, which is harmful to many plants and present in tap water, will dissipate. This simple action requires virtually no effort from you, yet it dramatically reduces stress for your green companions and promotes their healthy well-being during the challenging winter months. A compelling visual demonstration is to show a thermometer in a glass of cold tap water next to one in a watering can that has been sitting out, clearly illustrating the temperature difference. Now let's talk about the second biggest plant killer, right up there with rigid scheduling, ignoring the specific needs of different plant types. If you approach all your greenery with the same watering can and the same set of rules, you might as well be feeding a cat, a hamster, and an aquarium full of fish the same exact kibble. The outcome will be tragic. The plant world is incredibly diverse, and every group has its own unique moisture requirements, honed over millions of years of evolution, especially when they enter dormancy. Let's divide all our indoor plants into two broad categories. Group 1 consists of succulents and cacti. These plants are desert dwellers, hailing from arid regions. Their entire nature is built around storing water in fleshy leaves and stems and conserving it carefully. In winter, with poor light, they enter a very deep dormancy. Their metabolism virtually shuts down. Watering them during this time is almost guaranteed death. Their root systems are absolutely not adapted to constantly wet environments and will rot instantly. The rule for most succulents and cacti in winter is simple. Virtually no watering at all. From around October to March, you might give them 1 or 2 symbolic sips, just enough to prevent the roots from completely shriveling up. The second group consists of plants native to tropical and subtropical forests. This includes most of our common foliage plants, ficus, monsteras, peace lilies, spathiphyllum, and ferns. While they don't have a distinct winter with snow back home, they do experience seasonal shifts, like a rainy season and a drier one. They also have a dormancy period, but it's not as deep as the succulents. They don't stop living entirely. They just drastically slow down. They still need water in the winter, but far less often and in much smaller volumes than they need in the summer. For these plants, the soil dry-out rule is key. This means we wait until the top third or even half of the potting mix has completely dried out before we water again. You can't simply say, I water all my plants every 2 weeks. Instead, you should be saying, I water my zesty plant, Zamioculcas, once a month, and I water my peace lily every 10 days, after physically checking the soil. Study the origins of each plant in your care. Understand where it comes from, and its specific needs will become inherently clear. This is the key to an individualized approach and a thriving, healthy collection. Let's dive deeper now into the specifics of watering succulents and cacti during winter. This topic deserves special attention because these seemingly low-maintenance plants are actually where beginners make the most costly mistakes. The reason is simple. Their incredible drought resistance actually works against us. Humans are naturally prone to anthropomorphizing. We project our own needs onto the plants around us. We assume if we're thirsty, our poor cactus must need a drink too. And this very care is exactly what kills them. To properly water them, you must understand their life cycle. In their native desert habitats, rain is rare but heavy. These plants have adapted to rapidly absorb massive amounts of water, then live off those reserves for months. For succulents kept indoors, winter in our climate isn't just the cold season. It's the darkest and most arid period, Lack of light signals them to enter a state of deep dormancy. Every single process slows down or stops entirely. If water hits the soil during this time, here's what happens. The roots, which are essentially shut down, cannot absorb it. The moisture sits in the potting mix. Even though succulent soil is designed to be gritty and fast-draining, it's not meant to hold moisture for long periods. In warm indoor temperatures, this stagnant, wet environment instantly becomes a breeding ground for pathogenic fungi and bacteria that cause rot. The roots turn to mush, often in just a few days. Crucially, the above-ground portion, the cactus or echeveria itself, can look perfectly healthy for weeks, surviving on internal reserves. By the time you notice something is wrong, the stem feels soft or spots appear. It is usually too late to save it. So what is the concrete plan of action? Starting in late September or early October, we begin to gradually cut back on watering, steadily increasing the intervals between drinks. By November, watering should be minimal. For most species kept in cool conditions, roughly 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, watering should cease entirely until early March. If the plant is overwintering in a warm apartment on a windowsill, you can water it very sparingly, perhaps once every month to 6 weeks. Give it a tiny amount, literally a tablespoon or two, just enough to lightly moisten the very top layer and keep the finest root hairs alive. Always go by the plant's appearance. If it starts to wrinkle slightly, that's your signal for a tiny sip of water. However, remember that a slight loss of turgor is completely normal during winter dormancy. Do not be afraid to underwater them. Be terrified of overwatering them. Remember this, it is practically impossible to kill a cactus by drying it out in winter, but it is incredibly easy to rot it. Now let's turn our attention to the complete opposite of succulents, tropical plants. These are our beloved monsteras, philodendrons, alocasias, calatheas, spathiphyllums, and many other residents of the humid jungle. Their winter care is fundamentally different from that of desert dwellers, and it comes with its own set of subtleties and common mistakes. Unlike cacti, these plants lack the mechanism to store large amounts of water in their leaves and stems. They hail from humid rainforests where it rains frequently, and the air humidity is extremely high. They are accustomed to the constant presence of moisture in the soil. Therefore, stopping watering completely during the winter is fatal for them. They would simply dry out. However, as we already know, the short daylight hours of our winter still cause them to slow their growth and enter a state of relative dormancy. It's not as deep as the dormancy succulents experience, but it exists. They don't stop taking up water, but they do it much slower and in smaller volumes. The main mistake here is continuing to water them on a summer schedule. In the summer, during their active growing season, you might have watered your monstera every 3 or 4 days, and it happily drank it all up. If you continue doing this in winter, you are guaranteed to end up with root rot. So how do we find that balance? This is where the rule of checking the soil is more relevant than ever. For most tropical plants, the winter watering strategy is this. Allow the soil in the pot to dry out approximately 1/3 of the way down. For more drought-tolerant varieties like ficus or syngoniums, let it dry out halfway. Only then should you water thoroughly, ensuring the entire soil mass is evenly saturated. Crucially, we are not changing the volume of water, but the frequency. We still water as heavily as we do in the summer, but much less often. For example, if you watered every 4 days in the summer, your winter schedule might stretch to every 10 or 12 days. The specific numbers depend on the pot size, soil composition, and the temperature and humidity in your apartment. Therefore, there can be no universal schedule, only regular checking of the soil with your finger or a wooden probe. Special attention should be paid to the so-called water lovers or heavy drinkers, such as spathiphyllums, peace lilies, and certain types of ferns. They quickly signal a lack of moisture by dropping their leaves. But even these plants should not be kept in a constant bog during the winter. A slight wilting of the leaves is a signal to water, not a catastrophe. Give the soil at least a little time to dry out between watering so the roots can breathe. We've covered watering frequency, but there's another critically important factor that can easily undo all your hard work. This is the third major mistake: poor drainage. You might perfectly follow your watering schedule, check the soil, and diligently meet your plant's needs. But if the water has nowhere to escape the pot, you'll still create a deadly swamp inside. What exactly is drainage? Simply put, it means having drainage holes at the bottom of the pot. Their presence is absolutely mandatory for 99% of all houseplants. No matter how beautiful a decorative container or cache pot is, if it doesn't have holes, planting directly into it is a huge risk. Any water that the roots don't immediately absorb must freely drain out into the saucer. If the water lingers at the bottom, the lower soil layer turns into an oxygen-deprived bog where the roots will instantly rot. Even if the top layer feels perfectly dry, you could have a disaster happening underneath. So, the first rule is always to check for adequate drainage holes. Sometimes, store-bought pots have holes that are too small or clogged with plastic. You need to clean them out or even widen them. The second consideration is the drainage layer at the bottom of the pot. Traditionally, people use materials like leca, clay pebbles, gravel, or broken pottery, believing that this layer prevents water from stagnating around the roots. However, modern horticultural research suggests that the benefit of this layer is actually debatable. It takes up valuable space in the pot, and, due to the laws of physics, can ironically create a so-called perched water table, or saturation zone, right at the boundary between the soil and the drainage material. Much more important than having pebbles at the bottom is the proper composition of the potting mix itself. The soil needs to be loose and aerated so that water not only passes through easily, but also leaves essential air pockets inside for the roots to breathe. To achieve this, you should add amendments to the basic peat-based potting soil, such as perlite, vermiculite, coarse sand, cocoa coir, or bark chips. The proportions vary dramatically depending on the plant. For instance, succulents need a mix that is 50 to 70% amendments, while moisture-loving calatheas might only need 20 to 30%. The real guarantee against overwatering is a correctly formulated soil mix combined with excellent drainage holes. After every watering, wait about 15 to 20 minutes, and then be sure to empty all the excess water from the saucer. Allowing the plant to stand in water is one of the most common and careless mistakes. It's like forcing a person to sit around in soaking wet shoes. It's uncomfortable and ultimately dangerous for their health. Let's talk about the main driving force of life on Earth, and crucially, life in your plant pots. Light. The role of light becomes critically important during winter, and it's directly tied to your plant's water requirements. As we know, water is a key component of photosynthesis. Simply put, the formula is this: lots of light equals active photosynthesis equals the need for water. Little light means minimal or no photosynthesis, which means no need for water. In our latitudes, winter brings two negative processes simultaneously. First, the daylight hours shorten drastically. If the sun shines for 16 hours in the summer, that drops to only 7 or 8 hours in December. Second, the intensity of solar radiation drops. The sun is low on the horizon. Its rays pass through a much thicker layer of the atmosphere, losing their strength. Plus, there's the constant cloud cover. As a result, the amount of light your plant receives, even on the brightest south-facing window, is dozens of times less than it is in summer. For the plant, this is a direct signal. Stop the engine, we're switching to energy-saving mode. It can't produce energy, which means it can't grow, and it can't absorb water. If you don't adjust your watering schedule to match this sharp drop in light, you will inevitably overwater your plant. The roots simply cannot cope with the volume of moisture they easily drank up during the summer months. What should you do in this situation? The first and most obvious step is to move all your plants as close to light sources as possible. In winter, there is no such thing as too much light. Get all your green companions right onto the windowsills. Dedicate the brightest south-facing windows to your most light-hungry plants, your succulents, ficuses, and citrus trees. East and west-facing windows are suitable for those that tolerate partial shade. North-facing windows in winter are really only suitable for the most shade-tolerant varieties, like the ZZ plant or the cast iron plant. Second, and this is the best gift you can give your plants during winter, is supplemental artificial lighting. Modern full-spectrum grow lights are highly efficient and economical. Even a simple 10 to 15 watt cool white LED bulb, positioned above the plant and run for 10 to 12 hours a day, can dramatically change the situation. With good supplemental light, the plant won't fall into a deep dormancy. It will continue to photosynthesize, albeit slowly, and consequently consume water. This allows it to survive the winter much healthier and stronger. And yes, if you use supplemental lighting, you will need to water that plant more often than one sitting in a dark corner. Always remember the direct relationship. More light means more frequent watering. Less light means less frequent watering. That is the unbreakable rule. Now let's look at the most significant paradox of winter houseplant care in a city apartment, the central heating paradox. On one hand, our homes are wonderfully warm in winter, sometimes even hot. But on the other hand, this creates near desert conditions for our plants. Let's break down exactly why this happens. When the radiators kick in, they ruthlessly dry out the air. The indoor relative humidity level can plummet to 20 or 30%. For comparison, the comfortable level for humans is 40 to 60%, but for most of our tropical houseplants, it should ideally be 60 to 80%. Essentially, we are creating an extremely arid atmosphere for them. So, what happens to the plant in these conditions? Its leaves actively lose moisture through tiny microscopic pores called stomata. This process is known as transpiration. The drier the air, the more intense the evaporation. The plant is rapidly losing water. And this is where the beginner trap lies. You see the top layer of soil drying out quickly due to the arid air. You assume the plant is thirsty, so you instinctively reach for the watering can, but you forget that the root system is essentially dormant due to the lack of adequate winter light. This creates a dangerous combination. The above-ground parts are losing moisture rapidly because of the dryness, but the root system cannot replenish this loss because it isn't working at full capacity, especially if it's sitting in cold soil on a windowsill. Yet seeing that dry top layer, you water again and again, creating a swamp in the pot where the dormant roots simply rot. This is the paradox. The plant is simultaneously suffering from dry air and excess moisture in the soil. So how do we break this vicious cycle? The solution has to be comprehensive. First, we need to stop fighting the symptom, the dry soil, and address the cause, the dry air. We must raise the humidity immediately surrounding the plants. The most effective method is a household humidifier. Place one right next to your green collection, and your plants will definitely thank you. Simpler methods include placing pots on a wide saucer filled with moist clay pebbles or gravel, making sure the bottom of the pot doesn't touch the water. Regularly misting your plants with warm water, though this offers only a temporary effect, and grouping plants closely together to create a localized humid microclimate. Second, you need to isolate your plants from the direct heat of the radiators. If a pot is sitting on a windowsill directly above a radiator, the rising hot air hits the plant constantly. Place a piece of foam insulation or a board on the windowsill to create a thermal barrier. You could also hang a special radiator screen or simply a damp towel over the heat source. By solving the dry air problem, you will reduce leaf evaporation and find that the soil in the pot dries out much slower. This will naturally allow you to return to an appropriate, infrequent winter watering schedule. Knowing how to correctly diagnose a plant's health is the skill that separates seasoned growers from beginners, and it is especially important to recognise the signs of overwatering because those symptoms are often tricky and easily masked by other problems. Let's put together a detailed checklist of symptoms that will help you spot the problem early. The first and most obvious indicator is the condition of the soil. If the potting mix stays wet for weeks on end, If it feels constantly soggy, dense, and sour, and you start seeing green buildup or mold appearing on the surface, that's a major red flag. Furthermore, the pot might emit an unpleasant, swampy, or rotten odour. This is the telltale smell of dying roots. The second major symptom is the state of the leaves. This is where the confusion usually begins. Overwatered plants often show yellowing leaves. However, this yellowing doesn't look like aging or nutrient deficiency. It frequently starts with the lower, older leaves. The leaves become limp, soft, watery, and lose their firmness even though the soil is wet. This is the crucial point. If the leaves are wilting while the soil is still soaking wet, it is almost 100% guarantee that you have root problems. The roots have rotted and can no longer draw water up to the foliage. You might also see dark, brown or black spots appearing on the leaves, especially around the tips and edges. This is tissue necrosis caused by root death. Another characteristic sign is massive leaf drop. The plant begins shedding both old and new leaves in a desperate attempt to survive and reduce its surface area for water loss. The third marker involves the trunk and stems. In many plants such as ZD plants, dracaenas and succulents, the base of the stem near the soil will turn soft, mushy, and often dark. If you press on it, you might feel a hollow spot or a pulpy texture inside. This is a sure sign that the rotting process is very advanced. The fourth, indirect sign is the appearance of tiny black flies or fungus gnats around the pot. Their larvae thrive in damp, decomposing organic matter. If these little flies are buzzing around your plants, it's a clear signal that you are systematically keeping the soil too wet. If you notice 2 or 3 of these symptoms in your plant, you need to take immediate action. Don't wait around hoping it will resolve itself. Most likely, an emergency repotting and root system inspection will be necessary, something we will discuss in depth later. To get the full picture, it's essential to know how to distinguish between the symptoms of underwatering and overwatering. As we know, some external signs can be similar, which often confuses beginner plant parents. So, let's break down the classic signs that your plant is thirsty. The first and most crucial difference is the state of the soil. When a plant is underwatered, the potting mix will be bone dry, light, and may even pull away from the sides of the pot. If you push your finger in, you'll feel a dry, dusty substance all the way down. Crucially, there will be no smell of rot, unlike with overwatering. The second and most characteristic sign is a loss of turgor. The leaves and young stems become weak and limp. They literally look like they flopped over. They aren't yellow or mushy like with overwatering. They are specifically wilted, like pieces of cloth. This happens because the cells lack the water needed to maintain internal pressure. This symptom is often the easiest to fix. Turgor usually restores within a few hours after a good watering. This is easily demonstrated by plants like the peace lily or Phytonia, which react instantly to drought and bounce back just as quickly once watered. Third, look for changes in leaf appearance. The tips and edges may start to dry out, turning brown and becoming crisp and brittle, almost like paper. This is different from the soft, dark spots you see with overwatering. The leaves may start to curl inward as the plant tries to reduce its surface area for evaporation. In some plants, like the Marantaceae family or prayer plants, leaves naturally fold up at night, but during severe drought, they may not fully open even during the day. The fourth sign is slowed or completely stopped growth. This is logical. No water means no material for building new cells. If your normally active plant has suddenly stalled and the soil is consistently dry, this is a clear sign of severe thirst. The fifth and less obvious sign is the yellowing and dropping of lower leaves. Yes, this happens with overwatering too, but there is a crucial difference. When underwatered, the leaves first yellow, then dry out completely, becoming crunchy and brittle before they drop. The plant is intentionally sacrificing its older foliage to conserve water for newer growth. In contrast, when overwatered, leaves often drop while still green or are soft and limp. The ultimate diagnostic tool in any dubious situation is always checking the soil. If the leaves are limp but the soil is dry, water it. If the leaves are limp and the soil is wet, you have serious root problems. So, we've learned how to tell the difference between thirst and sickness. Now that we're sure the plant actually needs watering, the next question is, how do we do it correctly? This is where the fourth common mistake comes in: shallow watering, or as some call it, just giving the plant a little sip. What exactly does that mean? Afraid of overwatering, people often pour just a small amount into the pot, say 50 millilitres. That water only manages to wet the top inch or two of soil. It never reaches the main root ball, which is sitting deeper in the middle and bottom of the container. We think we're being cautious, but we're actually harming the plant, and here's why. First, when you water this way, the deep roots don't receive any moisture and begin to die off from drought. The plant is constantly underwatered, even though we are regularly watering it. This causes stress and weakens the entire plant. Second, the plant tries to adapt to these stressful conditions by growing roots where the moisture is, right near the surface. The result is a weak, shallow root system that is extremely vulnerable to both drying out quickly and temperature fluctuations. The deep, anchor roots essential for stability simply don't develop. Third, and this is crucial, regular shallow watering leads to salt build-up in the soil. Tap water always contains dissolved mineral salts. When we water deeply, saturating the entire root ball, the excess water flushes out these salts through the drainage holes. This process effectively cleanses the soil. If, however, we only pour small amounts, the water evaporates from the surface, and all those salts are left behind in the top layer of the soil. Over time, their concentration becomes toxic to the plant. We call this substrate salinization. You might see this as a white or reddish-brown crust on the soil surface and the sides of the pot. In this environment, the roots get a chemical burn, lose their ability to absorb water, and start to die off. The plant wilts and struggles, and we're left scratching our heads wondering what went wrong. So, remember this rule. Watering must be infrequent but heavy. It is far better to water thoroughly once every 2 weeks than to give it a tablespoon every single day. We'll discuss exactly what proper, thorough watering looks like in the next segment. We've arrived at the description of the benchmark watering technique suitable for the majority of houseplants. This is the method of complete saturation, often called soaking the root ball. The core idea is that every time you water, the water must uniformly saturate the entire volume of potting mix from the surface all the way to the bottom, allowing any excess to drain away freely. This technique mimics nature. A heavy rain soaks the ground, saturating the soil, and the surplus moisture drains into deeper layers. How do you do this correctly step by step? 1. Verify the need. Ensure your plant genuinely needs water, using the testing methods we covered earlier. 2. Prepare the water. Use room temperature, dechlorinated, or aged water. 3. Water thoroughly and evenly. Pour slowly and uniformly over the entire soil surface. Avoid dumping all the water in one place. Use a watering can with a long spout to direct the stream past the foliage and straight onto the potting mix. Continue watering until you see water actively flowing out of the drainage holes into the saucer or drip tray. This is your cue that the entire root ball is saturated. 4. The critical wait. Wait 15 to 30 minutes. This allows the soil to absorb the maximum necessary amount of moisture while all the surplus, or gravitational water, drains completely. 5. Empty the saucer. After this time has elapsed, you must drain all the remaining water from the drip tray or saucer. It is absolutely vital not to let the pot stand in water. Doing so blocks oxygen access to the roots through the drainage holes, which inevitably leads to root rot. What are the advantages of this method? Total root hydration. First, you guarantee that the entire root system is thoroughly soaked, not just the top layer. This encourages uniform root development throughout the entire volume of the pot. Nutrient flush. Second, this process achieves the necessary leaching of excess mineral salts we discussed earlier. This prevents soil buildup and keeps the potting medium healthy. Mindful watering. Third, this approach forces you to be attentive. You can't just water on autopilot. You must wait for the saturation and then manually empty the saucer. This creates good habits and discipline. Are there any exceptions? Yes. Certain plants, such as African violets or gloxinias, strongly dislike getting water on their fuzzy leaves. For these, alternative watering methods are better, and we will cover those next. Also, exercise extreme caution when applying this technique to plants in enormous tubs or containers, where the soil naturally takes a very long time to dry out. However, for 90% of your houseplant collection, the complete saturation method is truly the gold standard for proper and healthy watering. But what about those super fussy plants that hate getting their leaves or their growth points wet? Or the ones with such a tightly bound root system that the water just runs down the sides of the pot without soaking the soil? For these situations, there is a fantastic alternative, the method of bottom watering or sub-irrigation. This technique is considered much gentler and offers a host of undeniable advantages, especially for certain groups of plants. How does it work? It's very simple. Instead of pouring water onto the soil from above, you fill a deep saucer or container and place the potted plant directly into it. Thanks to the capillary effect, the soil acts like a sponge, drawing water up through the drainage holes. The process moves from the bottom up, allowing the plant to essentially drink exactly as much water as it needs. Here is the procedure. Fill the saucer with settled, room temperature water, roughly 1/4 of the way up the pot's height. Place the pot into the water. Let the plant drink for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. You'll know the process is complete when the top layer of soil feels moist to the touch. This indicates the entire root ball has been thoroughly saturated. Afterward, remove the pot from the water, let the excess drain for a few minutes, and return it to its usual spot on a dry saucer. Which plants especially benefit from this method? First, the previously mentioned African violets, Streptocarpus, and cyclamen. Water hitting the centre of their rosette can easily cause crown rot, and bottom watering completely eliminates this risk. Second, it's great for plants with very dense foliage, where it's physically difficult to reach the soil without soaking the leaves. Third, it is perfect for rehydrating severely dried out plants. When the soil ball completely shrinks, overhead watering often results in the water just running straight down the sides without soaking the dry medium. Submersion guarantees that even the most parched soil will be uniformly saturated. Fourth, this method significantly reduces the risk of the topsoil layer compacting, which frequently happens with traditional top watering. Are there any downsides? Yes. Bottom watering is not as effective as top watering for flushing excess salts and mineral buildup out of the soil. On the contrary, salts tend to rise with the water and accumulate in the top layer. Therefore, it is recommended that every few months you still give these plants a shower and thoroughly water them from above to leach the substrate. Otherwise, bottom watering remains an excellent, safe, and highly effective tool in the careful gardener's arsenal. Where you place your houseplant is hugely important, and in winter, one of the most treacherous spots is the cold windowsill. On the one hand, it's the brightest spot available, but on the other, it's a high-risk zone. Let's break down the dangers lurking for your plants on a cold window and how to minimize them. The main issue is the chilling of the root system. A windowsill, especially in older homes, can get extremely cold. The surface temperature of stone or plastic might be only a few degrees warmer than the outside air. If a pot sits directly on that surface, the soil inside chills to critical temperatures. Cold roots simply don't function properly. Even if there's moisture in the soil, low temperatures drastically reduce the root's ability to absorb it. This creates a situation similar to overwatering. The plant can't drink, even though water is available. Prolonged exposure to cold and wet soil is a direct path to root rot and eventual death. Tropical plants like orchids, alocasias, and marantaceae are especially sensitive to cold feet. For them, a soil temperature below 16 to 18 degrees Celsius is already a major stressor. What should you do? The first and easiest step is to insulate the pot from the cold surface. Place a stand made of material with low thermal conductivity underneath it. This could be a piece of styrofoam, thick felt, a wooden board, a stack of old magazines, or a specialised cork mat. Even this simple measure will raise the temperature in the pot by several crucial degrees. The second danger is drafts. Even if you have modern vinyl windows, opening them just for microventilation sends a stream of icy air directly onto the windowsill area. This can be devastating for delicate tropical leaves. They can suffer cold burn, develop spots, or turn yellow. Therefore, it's best to move plants away from the windowsill while airing out the room. Alternatively, you can tilt the windows open, ensuring the cold air flows upward rather than blowing directly across the plants. The third point relates to watering. If your plant is sitting on a cold sill, the soil will dry out much slower than that of a plant located deeper inside a warm room. You absolutely must factor this in and water even less frequently. And of course, never water plants at night if they are sitting on a cold window. The soil will cool down even more overnight, and the roots will spend many hours submerged in icy water, a highly dangerous situation. The best time for winter watering is the morning or early afternoon, allowing the plant enough time to absorb the moisture before the temperature drops in the evening. The fifth major, and very common, mistake in winter plant care is continuing to fertilise your plants on a summer schedule. We're used to thinking of fertiliser as beneficial. It's the food that keeps our plants strong and beautiful. And that's true, but only during the active growing season. In winter, when your plant is dormant, that same fertiliser stops being a medicine and starts becoming a poison. Let's explore why. As we've mentioned many times, the plant is essentially sleeping in winter. Its metabolism slows down significantly. It isn't building new cells, growing leaves, or developing roots. Fertiliser is essentially a concentrated mixture of mineral salts, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and micronutrients. For the plant to use these salts, it must be actively growing and absorbing them. If you feed a dormant plant, it simply can't process them. The salts remain in the soil, build up and drastically increase the overall concentration of the mineral solution in the soil volume. What happens next is a phenomenon known as reverse osmosis. Osmosis is the physical process that allows roots to draw water from the soil. This is possible because the salt concentration inside the root cells is naturally higher than in the surrounding soil solution. Water naturally moves toward the area with higher salt content. However, when we over-fertilise, especially in winter, the salt concentration in the soil can become higher than the concentration inside the roots. When that happens, the process reverses. Instead of absorbing water, the roots start releasing it back into the soil. The plant suffers a severe chemical burn to its root system and starts wilting from dehydration, even though it's standing in wet soil. Think of it like how salt draws moisture out of meat or fish when curing them. The symptoms of over-fertilising mirror those of salt: build up in the substrate, dry brown leaf tips and edges, stunted growth, and an overall appearance of distress. So, what's the rule? For the vast majority of plants, all fertilisation should stop between late September and early October, and should not resume until early spring, usually March, when you see the first signs of waking and new growth. Are there exceptions? Yes, a few. These are plants that specifically bloom in the winter, such as the Christmas cactus, poinsettia, or cyclamen. During their budding and blooming phase, they expend a lot of energy and need support. You absolutely can, and should, feed them, but use fertilizers specifically formulated for flowering plants and reduce the manufacturer's recommended dosage by half. For everyone else, it's a strict winter diet. Remember, the best thing you can do for a dormant plant is simply leave it alone. We've already covered the importance of using water that has been allowed to sit, or off-gassed, and is at room temperature. But let's take a closer look at the actual quality of the water, as this also significantly impacts your plant's health, particularly during the vulnerable winter months. The water flowing from our taps is far from ideal for delicate root systems. It contains two major enemies of houseplants, chlorine and hard water minerals. Chlorine is used to disinfect water at municipal treatment centres. While these concentrations are generally safe for human consumption, chlorine can be toxic to plants, especially sensitive varieties like Marantaceae, Calatheas, and orchids. It suppresses beneficial soil microbes and can damage the fine root hairs, severely limiting the plant's ability to absorb water and nutrients. The second enemy is hard water minerals, primarily calcium and magnesium salts. Watering with hard water gradually increases the soil's alkalinity. That is, it raises the pH level. Most houseplants, however, prefer a slightly acidic to neutral environment. In highly alkaline soil, plants struggle to absorb many vital micronutrients, especially iron. This nutrient lockout results in chlorosis, where the leaves yellow between the veins while the veins themselves remain stubbornly green. The plant is essentially starving, even if the soil contains adequate nutrients. Furthermore, these calcium and magnesium salts build up in the substrate, causing soil salinization, the damage of which we have already discussed. You often see these salts manifest as that unsightly white mineral buildup, or crust, on the surface of the soil and on the inside walls of the pot. During winter, when watering is less frequent and thorough soil flushing rarely occurs, the negative impact of poor quality water is intensified. Every time you water, you add a fresh dose of these harmful chemicals and minerals, which accumulate and slowly poison the plant. So, what should you do, and where can you find the right kind of water? There are several effective ways to improve the quality of your tap water, and we will explore these in the next segment. For now, just remember this key takeaway. What is perfectly safe for us to drink is not always the best choice for our green companions. Paying attention to water quality is truly the next level of expertise in houseplant care. So, we've established that tap water needs some conditioning before it touches your plants. Thankfully, there are several simple, affordable ways to make it safer and more beneficial. The easiest and most fundamental method is simply letting it sit, or off-gassing. Pour the water into an open container, a watering can, a bucket, or a jar, and let it rest at room temperature for at least 24 hours. 48 to 72 hours is even better. During this time, two helpful things happen. First, most of the volatile chlorine will evaporate. Second, some of the hardness salts will settle out as sediment on the bottom of the container. When you water, be careful to pour gently so you don't stir up this residue. Plus, the water will warm up to room temperature. Letting the water stand is the absolute minimum requirement you should be following. The second more advanced approach is filtration. If you already have a household filter for your drinking water, whether it's a pitcher filter or an under-sink system, you should absolutely use that water for your plants. Filters are excellent at removing chlorine and heavy metals, and they significantly reduce hardness. This is far superior to just using standing water. However, a crucial warning: avoid using water from systems that employ ion exchange resins, which replace calcium and magnesium ions with sodium. Excess sodium is very harmful to plants. The third method, considered liquid gold by many houseplant enthusiasts, is using rain or melted snow. This water is naturally very soft, free of chlorine, and lacks harmful contaminants. In the winter, you can collect clean snow, making sure it's far away from roads and industrial areas, melt it down at home, and let it warm up. This provides wonderful structured living water for your plants. Our fourth method is boiling. Boiling causes chlorine to vanish, and the hardness salts precipitate out as scale. Boiled water is noticeably softer. The downside is that while boiling removes the undesirable substances, it also removes dissolved oxygen, which is essential for root respiration. Therefore, after boiling and cooling the water, you should aerate it, ideally by pouring it back and forth between two containers a few times so it can reoxygenate. Finally, you can artificially soften the water by adding a small amount of acid such as oxalic or citric acid, but this is definitely a method for experienced growers as it requires precise measurements to avoid causing damage. For most of us, a combination of simply letting the water stand and running it through a good household filter will be more than sufficient. Despite all our knowledge and best efforts, disaster can still strike. Maybe you went on vacation and asked a neighbour to water your plants, and they were a little too generous. Or perhaps you just made a mistake yourself. What should you do if you realise you've overwatered your plant and you're seeing all the alarming symptoms? First, don't panic, but do act fast. If you only saturated the soil once and the drainage and potting mix are generally okay, you might be fine. Simply let the soil completely dry out before watering again. You can also carefully loosen the top layer of soil to improve aeration. But if you see signs of systematic overwatering, the soil isn't drying out, there's a foul odour, or the leaves are yellowing, emergency measures are necessary. This is a true rescue mission. Step 1. Immediate extraction. Immediately remove the plant from its pot. Gently tap the pot on all sides and take the entire root ball out. Don't be afraid. In this situation, this step is absolutely necessary. Step 2. Root inspection. This is the most crucial diagnostic step. Carefully shake off as much of the old saturated soil from the roots as possible. Examine the roots closely. Healthy roots on most plants are light in colour, white, yellowish, or light brown, and they should be firm and springy. Rotted roots, however, are dark, brown, or black. They feel soft, tear easily, turn into mush, and have that characteristic foul odour. Step 3. Surgical intervention. Take a sharp, sterile tool, a knife, shears, or scissors, and ruthlessly cut off all the rotted, dead roots until you reach healthy, living tissue. Don't hold back. Any remaining piece of rot can spread further and undo all your hard work. If you had to remove a large portion of the root system, you must proportionally prune the top growth as well, trim branches, or remove leaves, so the remaining roots can adequately supply the plant with moisture. Step 4. Disinfection. Powder the cuts on the roots with crushed charcoal or cinnamon, or treat them with a weak fungicide solution to prevent the development of further infection. You can leave the bare roots exposed to air for an hour or two to dry out slightly. Step 5. Repotting. Choose a new pot, one that is slightly smaller than the previous one since you have fewer roots now. Make sure to put fresh drainage material at the bottom. Use a brand new fresh, light and airy potting mix. Under no circumstances should you put the plant back into the old contaminated soil. Step 6. Post-op care. After repotting, water the plant very lightly, ideally adding a rooting stimulant. Place the plant in a warm, bright spot, but away from direct sun. You can cover the plant with a clear plastic bag to create a temporary greenhouse environment and boost humidity. Going forward, only water again after the soil has completely dried out. This is a complicated procedure, but often it's the only chance you have to save your beloved plant. We've already noted that some plants simply ignore the general rules of winter dormancy. These are the species whose natural flowering cycle happens to fall right in the middle of our winter months. This group includes popular favourites like the Christmas cactus, zygocactus, poinsettia, often called the Christmas star, cyclamen, and azalea. Caring for these plants in winter requires a completely different approach. They aren't resting. They are in the most energy-intensive stage of their lives, blooming. Clearly, you cannot water them as minimally as you would dormant plants. To develop buds and sustain lush blooms, they need significantly more moisture and nutrients. However, overwatering is still a major risk. Due to reduced light, the plant's root system isn't working as actively as it would during the summer. So how do we strike that perfect balance? The rule of letting the soil completely dry out simply doesn't apply here. The soil in their pots should remain consistently moist, not soggy but gently damp. You must avoid the soil block drying out entirely, which causes buds and flowers to drop, and you absolutely must prevent water from sitting in the saucer. The optimal strategy is to water frequently but lightly, only after the top inch or 2 to 3 centimetres, of soil feels dry to the touch. Use the same moisture checking methods you usually do, but react to dryness much faster. As for feeding, this is the main exception to the winter dormancy rule. During the budding period and throughout the entire bloom cycle, these plants need active support. Use specialised balanced fertilisers designed for blooming plants, which typically have a higher content of phosphorus and potassium, the essential elements for flowering. Nitrogen, which stimulates leafy growth, should be kept minimal during this time. Fertilise them roughly every 2 to 3 weeks, but it's safest to use half the dosage recommended on the package to avoid burning the roots, which are naturally weakened by winter conditions. Once the plant finishes blooming, it enters its own specific resting period. At that point, you should drastically reduce watering, stop fertilising entirely, and allow it to rest and gather strength for the next season, understanding and respecting the unique life cycle of every individual plant. That's the mark of a true green thumb. Orchids, particularly the wildly popular Phalaenopsis variety, deserve special attention because their watering requirements are fundamentally different from typical soil-dwelling plants. Orchids are epiphytes. In nature, they grow on tree trunks. Their roots are specifically designed to absorb moisture from the air and dry out quickly after a tropical downpour. They cannot tolerate being constantly wet. Their roots must breathe. Winter care for orchids follows the same general principles as for other houseplants, reducing watering due to lower light levels, but they have unique specific needs. The primary indicator that a Phalaenopsis needs water is the colour of its roots. As long as the roots are bright, plump green, they have enough moisture. Once they turn silvery grey and dull, the orchid is ready for a drink. In winter, this drying period can take 2, 3, or even 4 weeks, depending on the conditions in your home. Don't rely on the calendar. Focus only on the colour of the roots. The second important indicator is the weight of the pot. A plastic pot containing dry substrate, usually bark, will feel almost weightless. After watering, it becomes significantly heavier. Over time, you'll learn to determine if watering is necessary simply by lifting the pot. So how do you water correctly? Forget the watering can. The best method for orchids is soaking. Take a container, a basin or bucket, and fill it with warm, standing or filtered water. Submerge the orchid pot into the water so the water reaches just below the rim. Leave it to soak for 15 to 30 minutes. During this time, the bark and roots will absorb the required moisture. Afterwards, lift the pot and allow all the excess water to drain completely through the drainage holes. This may take 10 to 15 minutes. Place the pot on a saucer and return it to its spot. It is absolutely crucial that no water is left standing in the bottom of the pot or the saucer. This leads to immediate root rot. Also, when watering, make sure water doesn't pool in the crown, which is the centre of the leaf rosette. If this happens, gently blot it dry with a paper towel. Otherwise, rot can set in. If the orchid is not blooming in winter, stop fertilising. If it has produced a spike and is flowering, you can feed it with a specialty orchid fertiliser once a month, using a very dilute concentration, about a quarter strength. Proper winter watering is the key to your orchid's health and guarantees abundant blooms in the future. Up until now, we've focused mainly on houseplants, but plenty of us grow flowers and ornamental shrubs in containers on our balconies, patios, or near the front door. So, how do we handle them in the winter? Do they need watering? The answer is yes, but with some very important caveats. Container plants are much more vulnerable than their counterparts growing directly in the ground. The small volume of soil in a pot freezes solid much faster and more intensely than garden soil. The main danger for these plants in winter isn't frost so much as physiological drought. This happens when there's frozen water available in the soil, but the plant can't absorb it because the roots are inactive when temperatures are below freezing. Meanwhile, evergreens, like conifers, boxwoods, and heaths, continue to lose moisture through their needles and leaves, especially on sunny and windy days. The result is that the plant slowly dries out. That's why the key task in fall container care is what we call deep saturation or pre-winter watering. In late autumn, before continuous frost sets in, you must thoroughly drench all your containers so that the entire root ball is soaked through. This builds up the reserve supply the plant needs to survive the winter. But should you water during the winter? That depends entirely on the weather. If you have stable, continuous freezing temperatures all winter, and the soil in the pot is a frozen solid block, watering is pointless and potentially harmful. Any extra water will just add more ice. However, in regions with mild winters, where thaws are common and the temperature rises above freezing for several days, watering might be essential. If you notice the soil in the container has thawed and feels dry, you absolutely must water the plant. Do this during the warmest part of the day, using room temperature water so that it has time to soak in before the night freeze returns. Preparing the containers themselves for winter is also critically important. They need to be insulated to protect the root system from freezing solid. You can wrap the pots in burlap, horticultural fleece, or bubble wrap, or even place them inside cardboard boxes and fill the gaps with dry leaves or sawdust. It's also best to group the containers together and place them against a sheltered, wind-protected wall of the house. The better you insulate those roots, the less they will suffer from both frost and drought. Now let's leave the containers behind and head out to the main garden. Many gardeners are often concerned about winter watering, especially for conifers and broadleaf evergreens, like rhododendrons and mahonia. It's natural to assume Mother Nature handles everything, but that's not always the case. Just as with container plants, the primary threat they face in winter isn't freezing temperatures, but desiccation, or drying out. Evergreen needles and leaves continue to transpire, meaning they lose moisture throughout the entire year. This process slows down significantly in winter, but it never completely stops. Moisture loss accelerates dramatically in late winter and early spring, specifically February and March. The sun gains intensity, heating the dark foliage, which drastically increases transpiration. Meanwhile, the roots remain locked in frozen ground and are unable to replenish the lost moisture. The result is what we commonly call winter burn, although it is more accurately described as winter desiccation. The foliage turns yellow, brown, and eventually drops. This can severely diminish the plant's aesthetic value, or, in severe cases, kill it entirely. To prevent this catastrophe, the key is the crucial practice of full deep watering, also known as the moisture recharge soak. In October or November, just before the first hard freeze, you must thoroughly water all your conifers and evergreens. You need to apply several large buckets of water beneath each mature tree or shrub to ensure the soil is saturated to a significant depth. This builds up the essential moisture reserves they will rely on throughout the winter. This soak is especially critical for plants installed within the current year, as their shallow root systems haven't had time to establish deep into the soil. It is also absolutely necessary if you've experienced a dry autumn. So what about watering actually during the winter? In most regions that receive consistent snow cover, additional watering is unnecessary. Snow acts as an ideal blanket, protecting the roots from severe freezing and slowly recharging the soil as it melts in the spring. However, problems arise in two specific scenarios: either a winter that is consistently cold and snowless, or periods of prolonged winter thaw with temperatures consistently above freezing. In these situations, the soil can become dangerously dry, and evergreens begin to suffer from drought stress. If you have several days of above freezing temperatures, the top layer of soil has thawed by a few inches, and there has been no recent precipitation. Supplemental watering can be extremely beneficial. You should use warm water, not hot, to help the soil thaw deeper, giving the roots immediate access to the moisture. This midwinter watering is generally considered an emergency measure, but it is often the action that saves your favourite arbor vitae and spruces from succumbing to spring dieback. Let's take another look at a critical question. Should you water your garden if there's no snow cover, but the temperature remains above freezing? This type of weather, often called a Euro winter or mild winter, is becoming increasingly common in many regions, presenting new challenges for gardeners. The answer is unequivocal. Yes, watering is not just advisable, it's essential. The lack of snow cover is highly detrimental to the garden. Snow serves two crucial functions. It acts as a thermal insulator, protecting root systems from deep freezing, and it provides a vital source of moisture. When there is no snow, the ground is exposed to harsh winds and low temperatures. Even if the air temperature is, say, 2 degrees Celsius during the day, it can easily drop to -5 or 10 degrees overnight, causing the upper soil layer to freeze deeply. Wind, especially in snowless conditions, severely desiccates both the soil and the above-ground parts of plants. It's not just evergreens that suffer, though we've discussed them before. Lawns, shallow-rooted perennials, whose rhizomes are close to the surface, and young fruit tree saplings and shrubs are also at risk. If you notice dry, windy weather lasting a week or more without precipitation, even if the temperature is slightly above freezing, it's time to grab your watering can or hose. How should this watering be done? First, choose the warmest day available, ideally watering around midday so that the water has enough time to absorb before the evening temperature drop. Second, the watering volume must be sufficient to soak the soil down to the main root zone, about 20 to 30 centimetres, or 8 to 12 inches deep. This may require approximately 1 to 3 buckets of water per square metre. Third, it is especially important to water the root zones of young trees and shrubs, as well as areas containing conifers and rhododendrons. Don't forget beds with fall-sown crops, like garlic and carrots, or perennial bulbs such as tulips and daffodils. They also need moisture for successful overwintering. This winter, watering during a thaw won't just hydrate your plants, it also improves the soil's thermal conductivity. Moist soil freezes more slowly and to a shallower depth than dry soil, providing better root protection. So don't hesitate to water your garden during a winter thaw. Your plants will definitely thank you for it. In the world of houseplant care, just like any other hobby or field, there are countless myths and misconceptions. One of the most persistent myths surrounding winter plant care goes like this: you don't need to water your plants in winter, just mist them. This idea stems from a correct premise, that indoor air is incredibly dry during the winter, and humidity levels definitely need to be boosted. However, it draws a completely wrong conclusion. Let's debunk this misconception once and for all. Misting and watering are two fundamentally different processes that serve separate functions and cannot replace one another. Watering delivers moisture directly to the roots, which are the plant's primary organs for absorption. The roots provide the water necessary for all vital life processes, maintaining cell structure, or turgor, and transporting essential nutrients. Without water in the soil, your plant will quickly die from dehydration, no matter how often or how much you mist it. Misting, on the other hand, is a procedure aimed at locally and temporarily increasing the humidity immediately surrounding the leaves. This is beneficial because it helps the plant reduce moisture loss through its stomata, significantly lowers the risk of spider mites, which absolutely thrive in dry conditions, and washes dust off the leaves, thereby improving photosynthesis. However, the moisture that lands on the leaves is barely absorbed. Plant stomata are not designed to absorb droplets of water. Therefore, misting simply cannot hydrate the plant. Trying to substitute watering with misting is like trying to hydrate a person by spraying them with a squirt bottle instead of giving them a glass of water. What's more, misting in winter carries its own risks. If a plant is sitting on a cold windowsill, the water droplets evaporating off the leaves will further cool the plant, potentially leading to chilling stress. Also, if water pools in the leaf axils or the growth point and remains there, it can easily cause rot. The effect of misting is also extremely short-lived. In a dry apartment environment, the water evaporates from the leaves within 10 to 15 minutes, and the humidity immediately drops again. So, to summarise, misting in winter is a useful maintenance practice and a tool for combating dry air, but it never, under any circumstances, replaces root watering. You must still water your plants. You just need to do it infrequently and according to the proper guidelines we've already discussed. When searching for the perfect solution to the perennial watering problem, many indoor gardeners turn to modern agricultural hacks like hydrogel or other moisture-retaining additives. The concept sounds ingenious. Introduce a substance into the soil mix that absorbs excess water during irrigation and then gradually releases it back to the plant, ensuring a perfect moisture equilibrium. But let's find out how well this actually works in practice, particularly during the winter months. Hydrogel is essentially a polymer capable of absorbing and retaining massive volumes of water, turning into a thick, gelatinous material. It is widely used in landscaping for outdoor beds or large exterior planters to significantly reduce the need for frequent watering during the intense summer heat. However, using hydrogel for indoor houseplants, and certainly during the winter, is a highly contentious decision. Here's why. The primary challenge of winter plant care isn't typically underwatering. It's the combination of excess moisture and lack of soil oxygen. When hydrogel swells, it not only locks up water, but also physically fills all the crucial air pockets within the potting mix. This severely compromises aeration. Quite simply, the roots cannot breathe. Since water consumption is minimal in winter anyway, having constantly saturated hydrogel in the pot creates a perfect breeding ground for root rot and anaerobic bacteria. Soil mixed with hydrogel takes an alarmingly long time to dry. Crucially, you lose the ability to accurately gauge the actual moisture level of the entire substrate. The hydrogel granules might be nearly depleted, yet the surrounding soil remains soaking wet. This completely throws off your watering schedule and makes proper control virtually impossible. Furthermore, the hydrogel granules eventually degrade into a sticky, unpleasant substance that further ruins the overall structure and drainage capability of the soil. So, what are the alternatives? If your goal is to boost moisture retention without sacrificing crucial aeration, stick to natural, organic components. Take vermiculite, for example. It absorbs water but retains a loose structure, which ensures air can still reach the roots. Cocoa coir, or coconut substrate, and sphagnum moss are also excellent at holding moisture while remaining highly breathable. However, even these must be used cautiously in winter, ensuring you create the correct soil proportions tailored to the specific needs of each plant. The takeaway is this: hydrogel is a specialized tool, best suited for outdoor planting and the summer season. For winter care of indoor plants, it is more detrimental than beneficial. Do not try to outsource your watering responsibility to chemical additives. The most effective tools you have are your knowledge, your vigilance, and a proper, well-draining soil mix. We've mentioned many times that dry air caused by central heating is one of the biggest enemies of indoor plants during the winter. Combating this dryness is a critical part of proper plant care, directly influencing even your watering schedule. Let's systematize all the ways you can create the ideal, humid microclimate for your green collection. The most effective, technologically sound, and reliable method is using a household humidifier. Modern ultrasonic or traditional evaporative humidifiers can maintain a set humidity level, like the 60% ideal for tropical plants, automatically. Place one in the room where most of your plants are concentrated, and you will see an immediate transformation. Leaves will stop crisping, turgor will improve, and your plants will generally look much happier and healthier. This truly is the best investment you can make in the health of your collection. If buying a humidifier isn't in the budget right now, there are plenty of tried and true methods. The second most effective approach involves using humidity trays, commonly called pebble trays. Grab wide, deep saucers, deeper than standard pot drip trays. Fill them with a layer of expanded clay, lisse, pebbles, moss, or any other highly absorbent hygroscopic material. Pour water into the tray so that it covers the filler but stays just below the top surface. Then place your potted plants on top of this moist material. Crucially, the bottom of the pot must not touch the water or the roots will rot. The water will constantly evaporate from the large surface area of the filler, creating a localized high humidity zone right around your plants. This method is continuous and very effective. The third method is plant grouping. Don't scatter your plants individually throughout the house. Gather them into tight clusters. Plants naturally release moisture through their leaves, and when they stand together, they create a shared, more humid microclimate supporting one another. It's like creating a little green oasis in the middle of your dry apartment desert. The fourth method, the simplest, but also the most temporary, is misting. As we've established, misting doesn't replace watering, but it's great for a brief humidity boost and for general leaf hygiene. Mist your plants once or twice a day using a fine mister and lukewarm, soft water. The fifth method is incorporating indoor water features, such as small fountains or aquariums. These are also natural sources of water evaporation and can significantly improve the indoor microclimate. By combining these methods, you can create conditions for your delicate tropical beauties that closely resemble their native environment, ensuring they survive the harsh winter period much more easily. And there you have it. Step by step, we've broken down the seemingly simple topic of watering plants in winter. But as you can now see, there is a whole science hiding beneath the surface, and understanding it is what separates a healthy, thriving plant collection from a string of disappointments and losses. Let's quickly summarize and cement the most crucial rules. Rule number 1, and this is fundamental. Most plants enter a dormant state during winter. Their need for water shrinks dramatically. Our motto should be, better to underwater than to overwater. Second, forget watering on a strict schedule. Only water when the plant genuinely asks for it. You must master the skill of checking the soil moisture, whether by using your finger, a chopstick, or simply by judging the weight of the pot. This is your essential skill set. Third, watering should be infrequent, but thorough. Soak the entire soil or root ball completely, but make sure you always empty any excess water from the saucer or tray immediately. Fourth, always consider individual needs. Succulents should barely be watered in winter. Tropical plants need the soil to dry out completely before their next drink, and flowering plants generally require consistently moderate moisture levels. Fifth, address the root cause, not just the symptom. Increase the ambient humidity using all available methods to break the vicious cycle of dry air leading to soggy roots. And never forget the importance of water quality, proper drainage, and optimal placement on your windowsill. This might sound complicated, but in reality, it's just a matter of establishing good habits and paying closer attention to your green pets. They are alive, and they are constantly sending us signals. Our job is simply to learn how to read them. Thank you so much for watching this entire video. I know it was a bit longer, but I truly hope you found it useful. If you learned something new today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more interesting content coming up. Now, I have a question for you. What was the biggest mistake you used to make regarding winter plant care? Or maybe you have a secret hack of your own. Share your story in the comments below. Let's learn from each other's experiences.